Hey everyone, and welcome. Have you ever wondered how an app just knows what to do? How it seems to think for itself, showing you exactly the right thing at the right time? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on that magic. We're diving right into the heart of that intelligence, JavaScript conditionals. This is literally how we teach our code to make smart decisions. So, let's get into it. Really think about it for a second. You open up an app, how does it know to show your personal dashboard instead of just a generic login screen? The answer? It's all about decision making. And this isn't just a small part of programming. It's absolutely fundamental. It's all about your code looking at a situation and choosing the right path forward. And at its core, it's actually pretty simple. Forget about code for a minute. The logic is something we do every single day. We're always making choices based on conditions, right? If it's raining, I'll take an umbrella. Otherwise, I'll leave it at home. This whole if then otherwise idea, that's the basic building block for making our apps smarter and way more responsive. Alright, so here's the game plan for today. We'll kick things off with the big idea of making code decide. Then we'll jump into the classic if statement. After that, we'll add else and else if to the mix, check out a really cool shorthand operator, and wrap it all up by figuring out how to choose the right tool for any situation. Okay, so to get our code to actually do different things based on different conditions, we've got to move beyond just talking about it in plain English. We need some real tools. And lucky for us, JavaScript gives us exactly what we need to build these decision-making branches right into our code's logic. And the two main tools we're going to be looking at today are the if statement. You can think of this as the real workhorse of conditional logic, and the conditional operator. You'll often hear this called the question mark or ternary operator, and it's a super powerful and clean alternative. All right, let's start with the most fundamental tool in our entire toolkit. Seriously, the if statement is where pretty much every developer begins their journey into making code smart. It's the simplest, most direct way to tell your code, hey, only do this if this other thing is true. And here's the core mechanic right here. You've got the if keyword, and right after it, a condition inside parentheses. What happens is JavaScript takes a look at that condition, figures out if it's true or false, and if it comes back as true, boom, it runs the block of code that follows. If not, it just skips right over it. Simple as that. Okay, let's make this real with an example. Imagine we're building a program to check a user's age. The logic is super straightforward. If the age is greater than 18, then we run the code to allow access. And hey, see those curly braces? Quick pro tip, always use them. Even if you only have one line of code, it just makes everything so much easier to read down the line. So this brings up a really, really important question. What does JavaScript actually consider to be true? Because its definition is a little more flexible than you might guess. It doesn't have to be the literal word true. The if statement is smart enough to convert whatever you put in those parentheses into a Boolean for you. And this is where things get super interesting. You see, JavaScript divides everything into two camps, truthy and falsy. There's only a handful of falsy values, things like the number 0, an empty string, null, and undefined. If you put any of these in an if statement, they'll act like false. But pretty much everything else, any other number, any string with something in it, any object is considered truthy. They'll all act like true. So here's the bottom line, and this is a classic gotcha for new developers. If you write if of 0, that code is never going to run because the number 0 is falsy. But, and this is the key part, if you write if of 0 with quotes, it will run. Why? Because now it's a string, and any non-empty string is always truthy, even if the only thing inside is the character 0. It's a subtle difference, but man, it is critical to understand. Okay, so the if statement is awesome for handling the true scenario. But what happens when the condition is false? We can't just leave our code hanging, right? We need to give it an alternative path, a different set of instructions for the otherwise case. And that's exactly where our next couple of tools come into play. And here's our solution, the else clause. It's this optional block of code that you can tack right onto the end of an if statement. It basically says, okay, if that first condition wasn't true, then do this instead. It's the perfect way to handle the flip side of the coin. So let's go back to our age checker. Now with else added, our little program feels complete. If the age is over 18, access allowed becomes true. Simple. But for every other case, whether they're 18 or 5, that else block kicks in and access allowed becomes false. See, now we have a clear, predictable action for both possible outcomes. But, life isn't always a simple yes or no, right? What if you've got more than just two possibilities? What if there are 3 or 4 or even more different paths your code needs to take? Well, that is the perfect job for else if. It lets you chain a bunch of different checks together. Check this out. With this code, JavaScript first asks, is the age less than 18? If that's not the case, it doesn't give up. It moves on to the next check. Okay, well, is the age greater than 65? And if that's also not true, it finally falls through to that last else block. This lets us handle a whole range of different conditions in a really clean logical order. Okay, now sometimes that whole if-else structure can feel a little clunky, especially when all you want to do is assign one value or another based on a simple condition. For those times, JavaScript gives us this beautifully concise alternative, the conditional operator, also known as the ternary operator. And this comparison just says it all, doesn't it? On the left, you've got 5 lines of code just to do a simple assignment. But look at the right. Using the question mark operator, we do the exact same thing in one single super readable line. It's just condition, question mark, value if it's true, colon, and the value if it's false. So clean, so efficient. And get this, you can even chain these question mark operators together, kind of like we did with else if. Now, I know this can look a little intimidating at first glance, but it's really just a series of questions. The code asks, is the age less than 3? If yes, boom, we get hi baby. If no, it just moves to the next question. Okay, is the age less than 18? And it keeps going down the line until one of the conditions is true or it hits the final default value at the end. So now we've got these two really powerful tools in our belt, the if-else block and the question mark operator. But, and this is a big but, just because the question mark operator is shorter, that does not mean it's always the right choice. When you're writing code, the most important thing always should be clarity. Can someone else or you 6 months from now understand what's going on? And honestly, this quote right here is the perfect rule of thumb. It just nails the best practice. The whole point of the question mark operator is to return one value or another. That's its job. The job of an if statement is to execute different branches of code. The key is to not try and make one do the other's job. Okay, so let's lock this in. Here are the key takeaways. If your main goal is simply to assign a value to a variable, the question mark operator is absolutely your friend. It's clean, it was made for that. But if you need to actually do things like run a function, pop up an alert, or execute several lines of code, you got to stick with the if-else structure. Yeah, it's a little longer, but it's way, way clearer to read and understand what's happening. And just like that, you now have the fundamental tools to make your code truly dynamic, responsive, and, well, intelligent. You can now guide your code down all these different paths based on what a user does, what data comes in, or really anything else in your app. This power to control the flow of logic, it just opens up a whole universe of possibilities. So the only real question left is, what are you going to build?